Picture this: the faint hum of a lawnmower in the distance, slicing through the stillness of a late summer afternoon, while I stand at my kitchen window, hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing a pan that doesn't need scrubbing. I'm Rachel, 34 years old, and this is my life. A quiet, predictable rhythm in a suburban neighborhood where the houses all look like they were cut from the same pastel blueprint. I've been married to Thomas for over a decade, a man who's been my anchor, my constant, through every storm and sunny day. Our home is a cozy little haven, framed photos of happier times lining the walls, us at the beach, us on our wedding day, grins wide and unforced. There's a tidy kitchen where I'm standing now, and a garden out back I tend to more out of habit than any real passion, pulling weeds just to have something to do with my hands. Our evenings are a well-rehearsed dance. We sit at our polished oak table for dinner, passing plates of roast chicken or spaghetti, exchanging small talk about our days. Later, we'll sink into the couch for movie night, a bowl of popcorn nestled between us, the glow of the screen flickering across our faces. At bedtime, there's the familiar warmth of cuddling in our soft, king-sized bed, his arm draped over me like a habit we can't break. These are the rituals that define us. Thomas kissing my forehead every morning before he heads to work, the off-key humming that spills out of him while he's stirring pasta sauce, the way we still chuckle over old inside jokes that only we understand. Like that time we got lost on a road trip and ended up singing show tunes at the top of our lungs to stay awake. From the outside, it's idyllic, isn't it? The perfect marriage, the perfect life. But here's the truth I don't whisper to anyone, not even to myself on most days. I'm hollow. That warmth I just described, the comfort of his presence, it's a lie I've learned to live with. His touch, which once sent sparks racing through me, now feels like a duty, something I endure rather than crave. His voice that used to be a melody I'd hang on to has faded into white noise, a background hum I barely register. I smile through our conversations, nodding at the right moments, laughing when I'm supposed to, playing the part of the content wife. But inside, I'm withering. There's an ache, a desperate yearning for something I can't even name, something I'm terrified to admit I've lost. Or maybe never had. I keep it hidden, tucked away behind the framed smiles and the neat rows of petunias in the garden. I don't know when it started, this slow decay, or how to stop it. All I know is that I'm trapped in a life that looks perfect on paper, but feels like a cage I've built with my own hands. There are others who will soon step into this. So, there I was, sitting across from Thomas at our polished oak table the next morning, the sunlight streaming through the window in lazy golden streaks. The air was thick with the scent of burnt toast. My fault. I'd left it in too long again. And the faint bitterness of coffee lingered as our mugs clinked against the wood, a small, sharp sound that cut through the quiet. Thomas was hunched over his plate, poking at a piece of scrambled egg with his fork, his brow furrowed like he was solving some grand mystery. He'd been distant lately, more so than usual, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Then, out of nowhere, he looked up, his hazel eyes catching mine for just a second before darting away, and he mumbled something about a space he'd rented downtown. A hobby, he said, though he was vague as ever. Something about woodworking or maybe art. I couldn't quite pin it down through the distracted haze of his voice. He didn't have time to manage it himself, he explained, what with work piling up. And could I help out with the renovations? Just check on things? Coordinate with the workers? Nothing too big? Before I could even process it, he slid a set of keys across the table, the cold metal scraping lightly against the wood until they landed in front of me. I picked them up, the jagged edges pressing into my palm, and felt a flicker of irritation spark inside me. Another errand, another task I didn't ask for, but I nodded anyway, muttering a half-hearted sure, because that's what I always do. Say yes, keep the peace, play the part. Later that afternoon, I found myself behind the wheel, driving through the city with the windows cracked just enough to let in the warm, gritty air. The streets blurred past in a mess of gray concrete and flashing traffic lights, horns blaring somewhere in the distance while the radio sputtered out a song I didn't know, all distorted guitars and a singer's voice I couldn't quite make out. My mind wasn't on the music, though. It was on Thomas, on how he'd roped me into this without even asking if I wanted to be involved. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, my knuckles whitening, as I turned onto a narrower street lined with old brick buildings, their facades crumbling at the edges. The address he'd given me led to a nondescript spot, a large, drafty hall squeezed between a pawnshop and a shuttered deli. I parked, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out, the keys jangling in my hand. The building loomed over me, its windows clouded with grime, and as I pushed open the heavy door, a wave of stale air hit me, carrying the faint, earthy smell of sawdust. Inside, the space was cavernous, all peeling paint on the walls and concrete floors that echoed under my sneakers with every step. The light was dim, filtering through those dirty windows in weak patches as I moved deeper into the hall, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. That's when I saw them, 3 workers, their voices a low murmur over the distant sound of a hammer striking wood. One of them, a man with broad shoulders and a paint-splattered shirt, turned as I approached. His name was Dean, he said, offering a quick nod as he wiped his hands on a rag, leaving streaks of white paint across his knuckles. His dark eyes held mine for a beat too long, and I felt a strange jolt, something unfamiliar stirring in the pit of my stomach. I brushed it off, focusing on the task at hand, asking about progress, timelines, anything to keep my voice steady. But Dean's gaze didn't waver, and as we talked, he stepped closer. So close I could smell the faint tang of turpentine on him. Then it happened. His paint-stained hand brushed my elbow, a fleeting touch, but it burned through the thin fabric of my sweater like a brand. He suggested we take a break, his voice low, almost a whisper, like it was meant just for me. I froze, caught in the intensity of his stare, those dark eyes boring into mine with a deliberate weight that made my breath hitch. I should have stepped back, said something to break the tension, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, rooted, as he reached up, his fingers sliding through my hair, slow and deliberate. It was intimate, too intimate, like he'd crossed a line I hadn't even known was there. And yet, I didn't stop him. My heart was pounding, a wild drum in my chest, as a flood of feelings I'd buried for years crashed over me. Desire, raw and unfiltered, a rebellion against the monotony of my life with Thomas, against the endless cycle of pretending everything was fine. It was like something inside me snapped, a tether I'd clung to for too long finally giving way, and I let myself fall into the reckless abandon I'd never dared to feel before. I didn't resist when Dean took my hand, his grip firm, and led me away from the open space of the hall, past stacks of lumber and drop cloths, to a cluttered back room tucked behind a half-painted wall. The door creaked as it shut behind us, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. The air in there was thick, heavy with the scent of paint and sweat, and the only light came from a single bulb dangling overhead, casting harsh shadows across the mess of tools and tarps. My mind was screaming at me to turn back, to remember who I was, who I belonged to, but my body didn't listen. It was like I was someone else, someone I didn't recognize, as Dean pressed closer, his hands rough but sure, and I gave in to the urgency of it all. The creak of an old table beneath us echoed in the small space, a jarring sound that matched the frantic rhythm of my pulse. Every sensation was heightened. The scrape of his stubble against my skin, the heat of his breath, the way my own gasps sounded foreign to my ears. Guilt clawed at me, sharp and relentless, but it was drowned out by the exhilaration, a twisted thrill I couldn't, or wouldn't, fight. But it didn't end there. I'm not sure how much time passed before I heard the door creak again, the sound barely registering through the haze. 2 other workers, their names lost to me in that moment, stepped in. Their presence a shock that should have snapped me out of it. But it didn't. I didn't pull away, didn't protest. Instead, I let it happen. Let myself sink deeper into the betrayal, into the chaos of it all. I'm not proud of this, but I'm not going to lie to you either. I liked it. Every forbidden second, every line I crossed, it felt like I was breaking free from the cage I'd been trapped in for so long. There was no regret in those moments, only a strange, dark liberation that coursed through me like wildfire, burning away the woman I'd pretended to be. When it was over, I was trembling, my breath ragged as I stumbled out of that cramped back room, my legs shaky beneath me, the weight of what I'd just done pressing down like a physical force. My skin was still flushed, a heat that wouldn't fade, burning from the inside out as I tried to steady myself against the rough edge of a workbench. My mind was a storm, racing with jagged thoughts. Flashes of Dean's hands, the intensity of those stolen moments, the reckless abandon I'd surrendered to. I could still feel the ghost of his touch, the memory searing itself into me. And with it came a wave of nausea, a sickening mix of exhilaration and dread. What had I done? How had I let myself fall so far, so fast? I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow the frantic thud of my heart, but it wouldn't listen. I was spiraling, caught between the thrill of breaking free and the crushing reality of the life I'd just shattered. I took a deep breath, the stale air of the hall filling my lungs, and forced myself to move, to step back into the main space where the echoes of hammers and low voices still lingered. Each step felt heavier than the last, my sneakers scuffing against the cold concrete floor as I emerged from the shadows of that hidden corner. The dim light filtering through the grimy windows seemed harsher now, casting long, accusing shadows across the cavernous space. I smoothed my hair with trembling fingers, trying to erase any evidence of my betrayal, but I could feel it clinging to me, an invisible stain I couldn't scrub away. My sweater was slightly askew, and I tugged at it nervously, as if straightening the fabric could somehow straighten out the mess I'd made of everything. That's when I saw him. As I stepped fully into the hallway, my breath caught in my throat, sharp and painful. Thomas. His silhouette was unmistakable, even in the murky half-light of the flickering bulb overhead. He stood near the far end of the hall, his back partially to me, but I knew it was him. The way his shoulders slouched just slightly, the familiar outline of his frame. He was wearing that navy jacket I'd seen him put on 100 times, the one with the worn cuffs he refused to replace because it was still good. In his hand, he clutched his phone, the screen glowing faintly, and as my eyes adjusted, I could see the camera app open, a glaring accusation in the dimness. My stomach plummeted, a sick, sinking feeling that made my knees weak. He'd seen it. Every moment, every damning second of what I'd done, captured through a cracked door I hadn't noticed, or maybe a window I'd been too lost to see. The realization hit me like a punch, stealing the air from my lungs. He knew. The silence between us was suffocating, thicker than the dust hanging in the air. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, as I stared at his unmoving figure. His face, when he finally turned just enough for me to see it, was unreadable. A mask of calm that chilled me to the bone. I'd expected rage, a storm of shouting and accusations, the kind of explosion I'd braced myself for in the fleeting moments after I'd pulled myself together. But this quiet, this stillness, it was worse. It terrified me more than any outburst ever could. His hazel eyes, usually so warm, were distant, locked on something I couldn't see, as if he were looking right through me. My hands shook at my sides, fingers curling into fists to hide the trembling, but I knew he could see it. He could see everything. I opened my mouth, desperate to say something, anything, to fill that awful void. Excuses formed on my tongue, half-truths about why I was here, lies about what had happened. But they died before I could speak them, crumbling under the weight of his gaze. What could I possibly say? That it was a mistake? That I didn't mean it? Every word felt hollow, a pathetic attempt to salvage something that was already in ruins. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Each beat a countdown to the inevitable collapse. And then, in that suffocating silence, Thomas moved. Not with the fury I'd braced for, not with the sharp, cutting steps of a man betrayed, but with a slow, deliberate pace that made my skin crawl. He closed the distance between us, each footfall on the concrete floor echoing like a drum in the hollow space of the hall. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him, couldn't even blink, as if looking away would shatter whatever fragile thread still held us together. My breath was shallow, caught somewhere in my chest, as he stopped just inches from me. So close, I could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the one I'd bought him years ago for an anniversary I could barely remember now. It was a scent that used to mean safety, comfort, home, but now it twisted something inside me, a bitter reminder of everything I'd just thrown away. He leaned in, his face so near that I could see the faint lines etched around his eyes, the ones I'd watched deepen over the years. His breath was warm against my ear, a soft rush of air that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I waited for the condemnation, for the words that would slice through me like a blade, cutting down every excuse, every lie I'd tried to build in my mind. But what came instead was something I never could have predicted, something that turned the ground beneath me to quicksand. His voice, low and steady, almost a whisper, slipped into the space between us. "I want more," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with a meaning I couldn't grasp. "Next time, I'll bring others." The words hung there, suspended in the stale air of the hall, a dark promise that seemed to echo off the peeling walls. My mind reeled, struggling to process what I'd just heard. More? Others? What did he mean? I felt a surreal shock wash over me, cold and numbing, like I'd been plunged into icy water. My thoughts scrambled, tripping over themselves as I tried to make sense of it, to find some hidden context I must have missed. But there was nothing, only the weight of his words, sharp and unyielding, carving themselves into my memory. I stood there, frozen, my body locked in place while my heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. This wasn't the Thomas I knew, the man who'd kissed my forehead every morning, who'd hummed off-key in the kitchen, who'd built a life with me brick by predictable brick. Or was it? Had I ever really known him at all? I looked into his face, searching for something familiar, something to anchor me in this storm of confusion. But what I saw was a faint smile, just a subtle curve of his lips, both achingly familiar and utterly foreign at the same time. It was as if I were staring at a stranger wearing my husband's face, someone who'd been hiding behind the mask of our routine life all these years. That smile, it wasn't anger, wasn't pain, but something else, something I couldn't name. It sent a chill through me, a creeping unease that settled deep in my bones. And yet, as I stood there, caught in the intensity of his gaze, I felt my own lips twitch upward, a mirroring smile I didn't mean to give. It was involuntary, born from a tangled mess of relief that he wasn't screaming, confusion at what he'd just said, and, God help me, a disturbing thrill that pulsed beneath it all. What was wrong with me? Why wasn't I recoiling, running, begging for forgiveness? Instead, there was this dark, electric current running through me, a part of me I didn't want to acknowledge, whispering that maybe I wanted to know what more could mean. I don't know who Thomas has become in this moment. Or maybe I'm finally seeing who he's always been, buried beneath the surface of our quiet dinners and movie nights. All those years, I thought I was the one hiding, the one withering behind a facade of contentment. But what if he'd been hiding too? What if the man I'd shared a bed with, laughed with, as Thomas's words lingered in the air, A heavy fog of uncertainty settled over me, wrapping itself around every thought, every breath. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the echoes of the hall fading into a distant hum, until finally he stepped back, his gaze still holding mine with an intensity I couldn't escape. Without another word, he turned toward the exit, his footsteps steady, purposeful, as if he hadn't just dropped a bombshell that shattered everything I thought I knew. I followed, my own steps faltering, my mind a chaotic whirl of questions I didn't dare ask. The late afternoon sun was waiting for us outside, spilling across the cracked pavement in long, jagged shadows that stretched like fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. I squinted against the sudden brightness, the warmth of the light a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in my chest. Neither of us spoke as we walked to his car, parked a little ways down the street, the silence between us not sharp or hostile, but heavy, loaded with unspoken possibilities I couldn't begin to unravel. I slid into the passenger seat, the familiar creak of the leather under me grounding me for just a moment before the weight of everything came crashing back. Thomas started the engine, the low rumble vibrating through the car, and we pulled away from the curb, the hall shrinking in the rearview mirror like a bad dream I couldn't quite shake. The drive home was a blur of muted colors, fading sunlight glinting off passing cars, the dull gray of the asphalt stretching endlessly ahead, the occasional flash of green as we passed trees lining the quieter streets closer to our neighborhood. I stared out the window, my reflection a ghostly overlay on the glass, pale and hollow-eyed, like I was looking at a stranger. The silence in the car wasn't tense, not exactly, but it was pregnant with something I couldn't name. A sense of anticipation, or maybe foreboding, as if we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see who would jump first. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant, to demand clarity, but every time I opened my mouth, the words dissolved, leaving a bitter taste behind. What could I even say? I'd betrayed him in the worst way, and yet here he was, not pushing me away, but pulling me into something I didn't understand, something that both terrified and intrigued me. My fingers fidgeted with the hem of my sweater, the fabric still slightly wrinkled from earlier, a silent reminder of my fall. I stole a glance at Thomas, his profile sharp against the fading light, his hands steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable. Was he angry beneath that calm exterior? Was he plotting something, or had he truly meant what he said? The idea of more, of others, circled in my mind like a vulture, picking at the edges of my sanity. I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation churning inside me, a toxic cocktail that made my stomach twist. It was as if, in that moment back in the hall, I'd stepped into a new version of my marriage, one where the rules I'd clung to for over a decade had been erased, scratched out with a violence I hadn't anticipated. Anything could happen now, and that uncertainty was a blade hovering over me, sharp and gleaming, ready to cut in any direction. I thought about how I'd broken the sacred trust between us, how I'd let myself be consumed by a moment of weakness. Or was it strength? A rebellion against the numbness that had defined my days for so long? I'd expected destruction, a fiery end to everything we'd built. But instead, Thomas had taken my betrayal and twisted it into something shared, something he seemed to desire just as much as I'd craved escape. How could that be? How could the man who'd once been my safe harbor now be the one steering us into uncharted, treacherous waters? My mind replayed every moment of our life together, searching for clues I might have missed. Late-night conversations that hinted at hidden desires, glances I'd dismissed as nothing, silences I'd filled with my own assumptions. Had I been blind all this time? Or had he changed in ways I couldn't understand, leaving me to wonder if I ever truly knew him at all? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.